please, we'll start our questions in about 10 till 1 or whenever he's ready.
I appreciate that. And let me say, I was given a time limit, and I'm going to try to abide by that, even though I'm an ordained minister. You know, we like to talk a long time. I want to thank you for this opportunity to at least share with you some of my ideas for the city of Houston. But let me first start by telling you, on behalf of my wife, Sandra Hall, to whom I've been married 32 years, she also sends her greetings, but today she had to take care of our son, 15-year-old, who is enrolling in summer school. He wants to get out earlier from St. Thomas High School. So on behalf of Sandra and my boys, I have two of them, one is 22 and one is 15, they send their greetings. Now, I'm running for mayor of the city of Houston, and quite honestly, we have a very good chance of winning this opportunity. I want to be and will be a mayor for everybody. In fact, my slogan is Hall for All, and I'm asking it in return, All for Hall. And to show that, I've actually reached out to the Republican Party and hired as one of my campaign managers a guy named Jeff Yates. In fact, Jeff, as you know, has been a strategist for the Harris County Republican Party and has been very successful. Well, Jeff and I actually work side by side in strategizing this election cycle. We also have persons of the Democratic persuasion as well in my campaign, because what I intend to be is a mayor for everybody. Everybody in the city of Houston is going to be represented in my office. Now, a little bit about my background. I came from a segregated South in Columbia, South Carolina, grew up very poor in South Carolina, went to public school, graduated from the University of South Carolina with honors, received a master's and a PhD degree from Duke University. I started teaching at Duke American Christianity as an ordained minister, training with Methodist preachers at Duke University Seminary. I went out and thought that I was going to be a theological teacher until I found out that I was making no money teaching at a university, and promptly decided I was going to go to law school. Came back and went to Harvard Law School and was blessed with a Harvard degree from the law school in 1986. So both a PhD from Duke University in theology and a law degree from Harvard Law School. Came directly to Houston, Texas, knew no one, had no family here, and this city opened its arms to me and my family. And for the last 27 years, God has given us a measure of success in the city. I was a defense lawyer initially for 6 years with a firm known as Vincent & Elkins. You probably heard that firm. Well, I was one of the lawyers in the trial section, and I was offered a partnership to be a partner at Vincent & Elkins as well. But then that career was interrupted when Bob Lanier was elected mayor of the city of Houston and asked me to serve as the city attorney for the city of Houston, which I gladly accepted and served as the city attorney for about 34 months. After that, I then went into private practice with a guy named John O'Quinn, stayed with him for 5 years, and I've had my own law firm for the last 13 years. I'm a trial lawyer, and I'm also a real estate owner in the city of Houston. Now, why in the world would I want to run for mayor of the city of Houston? I'm running because I believe we need a leader with vision for the future. Right now, this city is experiencing such economic growth that everybody says to me, Ben, why would you run now? Why don't you wait and let the president incumbent serve out 2 more terms? But this is not about her, and it's not about me. It's about the city of Houston and the direction it's going to be moving into the future. Just imagine, what was the greatest danger on the Titanic? You don't have to answer this. I'm going to give you an answer in just a second. What was the greatest danger on the Titanic?
Not prepared.
They were prepared. They were confident. They were too confident. They had an unsinkable ship. They were told that it was the best of all the ships ever built. And as a result, even the captain fell swayed and didn't keep looking forward at the dangers ahead. So we, as the city of Houston, right now, we may have a tendency to feel confident because we have such abundance and such economic growth. But we need a captain who is going to prepare the direction of the ship to avoid the economic icebergs that lay ahead. That's what we're going to offer to the voters this year, a choice forward for the city of Houston. I believe that the present economic policies of this administration are wrong and are anti-business friendly, and let me tell you why. Immediately when this mayor took office, her way of fixing the budget was to increase fees and licenses by 300 and 400%. It was also supplemented by increased ticketing throughout the city, and also some austerity programs that I thought went too deep and too far. But on top of that, we were also saddled with a fee called a drainage fee. Those were her ways of fixing what she called a revenue gap for the budget. But the consequence is that it penalizes those of us who are in the city. It costs those of us who choose to live in this beautiful city more money in order to run government. That ought not be the case. Let me tell you about a better way forward. The Kinder Institute at Rice University put out a disturbing report last year. That report found that 65% of the city is unsustainable. Let me repeat that. It's an astounding finding. 65% of the city of Houston, inside the corporate limits, is unsustainable. What's unsustainable? Unsustainable is where the cost to provide city services exceeds the revenue yield from those properties. That is, we're not getting enough revenue or taxes in order to cover just the basic city services we're providing. The consequence is only 35% of the city's properties are sustainable. You cannot keep this city going with those numbers. So what is a better way forward? Not to continue to penalize and charge expensive and excessive fees to those businesses that choose to operate in the city. That's an economic dead end. But rather to transfer these unsustainable properties into sustainable properties. How do you do it? You incentivize businesses to come into the city, not by taxing them to death, not by putting regulations on them, not by putting excessive costs on them, but rather by giving them some tax credits, some tax benefits, some tax rebates, some tax incentives to come inside the city. We are enjoying economic growth in the Houston region. Watch the language that's used there. Even the mayor understanding that the corporate limits, she cannot brag on those numbers, she encompasses the Houston region, the greater Houston region. That includes Fort Bend County. That includes Katy. That includes Montgomery County that's affixed to Houston. We inside the city still have the 65% unsustainable property. So as the mayor of the city of Houston, rather than taxing, rather than increasing these regulation fees, rather than increasing the licensing and permit charges, rather than cutting into the austerity issues that are too deep on our city employees, my proposal is that we're going to give tax incentives, tax benefits, tax credits, tax incentives for individuals and businesses to flourish inside the corporate limits of the city of Houston. That's the way forward, and quite honestly, that's the choice that's going to be on the ballot. Do you want more of the same with the increased charges of this administration, or do you want a better way forward which has more people sharing in the revenue needs of the city? I think that my proposal is better in that regard. One of my brothers asked me today as we were coming up the stairs, and when I got here and sat down, what are you going to do with the pension? How are you going to handle the pension issue? Let's dissect that just for a moment, and I hopefully won't get too deep with this. As a trial lawyer, I've actually sued actuarial companies. And so I know a little bit about actuarial projections and the assumptions that are used within the actual actuarial charges. Right now, the city of Houston has made promises to firefighters, to municipal employees, and to police staff that we've not funded. These are legacy liabilities that are on the city's books. But they're actuarial losses. That means if we project out the expected life expectancy of these retirees, do we have enough money to pay for it? And right now, the proposition is we don't have enough present funding in order to catch up the expected liabilities over the next 18 to 30 years. My proposal is totally different from what the city is presently doing. As opposed to continuing to kick the can down the road on the pension issue, let's tackle it head on. One assumption which we need to challenge is the aggregation of actuarial loss. I think that's a wrong-headed view of our actuarial liability. What do I mean by aggregation of the actuarial loss? They have assumed that there is a constant value of 30 years, that every retiree is going to live for 30 years after he or she retires. Well, we know that not to be the case. Some of us may not fare the next 10 years in our lives. So wouldn't it be a better proposition to have striations in the actuarial table? We have three decades. Decade 1 is the first 10 years after retirement. Decade 2 is year 11 through 20. And decade 3 would be year 21 through 30. If you have that kind of stratification of the actuarial loss, then you have more to play with on the table. And that is, we have actual insurance companies that are willing to assume the liability for the third decade of actuarial loss. Whereas right now, we don't even have that on the table to negotiate with. It would yield a better advantage to the taxpayers because we'd have less money to contribute down for an actuarial loss that is not a constant in the third decade of our pension liability. Will it solve the problem completely? Absolutely not. But it sure would take off a third of the funding obligations that we're right now requiring the taxpayers to pay. That is a better way forward, and it's a way that's not being articulated right now, even considered by the city. As the mayor of your city, as the mayor of your city, as the mayor of your city, I pledge to you to come at these problems with a new way of thinking so that we understand that we're putting the city on a sound fiscal foundation moving forward as opposed to playing political games with difficult fiscal problems. Now let's talk about Metro. And then I'm going to talk to you about crime, and then I'm going to be quiet and allow you to ask questions. Metro right now is a rudderless ship that's spending a lot of taxpayer dollars. We don't have a CEO. We don't have a CFO at Metro. But billions of our taxpayer dollars have already been committed to rail. We need leadership that's going to come forward and say we need someone at the helm to decide a prudent way to expend monies on the transportation system. Let me tell you a question that has to be answered. What are we attempting to achieve through rail? Densification or connection of dense areas? That equation, that alternative has to be answered. Are we attempting to use rail to densify populations, that is, grow populations that neighbor or are associated with the rail line that may now be sparsely populated? Or are we attempting to connect areas that are already dense? For instance, the airport to downtown, downtown to medical center to Galleria. Those are already dense areas. What is the equation that the taxpayers want solved in terms of rail? I think that question has not been ably answered by the present administration. I'm prepared to do so. My answer is the following. We are going to answer this question, and I think the best use of money, if we're going to be committed to rail, is to connect dense areas to dense areas as opposed to use rail to densify sparsely populated areas. I think that's a better policy position. That's my policy position. On the issue of crime. Now, I say this sometimes a different way depending on the crowd, but it's the same message. We generally start the analysis of crime by saying we need more police officers. You've heard that before, right? That's not where I start. I start the equation a little differently. Not that we need more police officers, but that we need less criminals. I want to make sure that criminals understand Houston is not friendly to criminal behavior. So if you're a criminal and you have criminal intent, don't come to Houston, Texas. And if you're already here, you need to leave if that's your lifestyle. I want to make that the first proposition of this organized society. So that we not assume that you have the license to commit crime and that we have to use our tax dollars to police you out of our city. First, don't come here. I want that to come from the mayor's office, not just the police chief. I, as the mayor, will say, I'm not going to be a hugger thug mayor. If you're a criminal, don't come to Houston, Texas. If you want to do something lawful, if you want to have a lawful business and a lawful life, we welcome you with open arms. But don't come here if you're intent to commit crime. Number two, if you're a nonviolent criminal, I disagree with this proposition that I have to put you in a cell, pay for your air conditioning, pay for your cable television, pay for your food, pay for your exercise equipment, and I'm punishing you. I'm the one getting up every day and working, and you have a lush life in prison. I believe if you're a nonviolent criminal, we should give you the option that you need to come out of that cell and work for us and work with us just like we do. We have some weeded lots that need to be cut. We have some garbage that needs to be removed from streets, and we have some trash that's been dumped in neighborhoods. We have a fertile opportunity for you to come and work off, literally, a debt to society, as opposed to just sit there and have taxpayers continue to fund it. That's my proposition for nonviolent criminals. And then one final thing on crime is this. There is a fundamental weakness criminals have. Can you tell me what that is? What's a fundamental weakness of criminals? They don't want to get caught. Right? Criminals don't want to get caught. That's why they fly their craft at night, so they can't be seen. Or that's why they break in your house when you're not there. Right? They don't want to get caught. Well, let's take away from them that option. I went to a civic association meeting the other day, and they were saying, Ben, would you support the deployment of cameras, these multi-directional 360-degree cameras in strategic locations? I said, well, as long as they don't peer into people's houses, as long as they're not invading anybody's privacy, and as long as they're not used in some discriminatory way, I'm in favor, and I'm willing to give you a tax advantage or a tax write-off if you have it in your neighborhood. The statistics show that 70% reduction in crime where those cameras are deployed, even if they're not working. Can you imagine when you go to the parking lot, don't you have a kind of funny feeling when you see them and you park right underneath them? It's like somebody's watching you. It's not my intent to say that they will be monitored by government. Big Brother's not going to be watching you. But at least we send a message to the criminal, if you come into this area, your coming and your going is going to be picked up. And at least if a crime takes place, we have that as a resource. So, Ben Hall has some new ideas coming to the ballot closest to you, which will be on November 5th of this year. Now, I've talked a lot. I would love to have any questions you might have.
Let's go ahead and thank Mr. Hall for being here. And I know there are going to be a lot of questions, so.
Mr. Hall,
Yes, ma'am.
are you familiar with the book, The New Jim Crow?
Yes, ma'am. You asked me about that before. In fact, I went and read that book. Yes. I agree with the proposition.
The drug war
Yes.
is the most
Pervasive oppression
illegal
of
and
minorities.
unjust
Yes.
program we have had.
Yes, ma'am. You turned me onto that book, and I did pretty good.
I appreciate that
Thank
very
you.
much. But that story really big.
Thank
I have
you.
some more information for you before you leave.
Okay, thank you.
Because thank you.
Alvin and then,
Yes, on the rain tax, I
Yeah.
have a two-part question, please. What is your opinion of the rain tax? And would you be willing, as a lot of people feel like they were misled when the rain tax was originally put on the ballot, would you be willing as the mayor to put the rain tax back on the ballot and let the people vote again?
Let me start with the latter part. Yes to yes. Okay. I oppose the rain. Well, I'm gonna call it the drainage fee since that's the way they characterize it. I opposed it when it was put forth before the vote. I opposed it when I went in and cast my vote, and I'm still against it today. Now, unfortunately, we have burdened the rain tax revenue now with non-shovel-ready projects. Just so that you know, even though it was misrepresented that it would be an average of $5 per household, and now you're getting bills substantially higher than that. In fact, I've had a client with $83,000 bill for this fee. That misrepresentation should be corrected by letting voters go back to the polls now that they've experienced it. Unfortunately, however, the city now is actually paying some personnel salaries with your drainage fee. I'm confident you never anticipated that to have occurred. and therefore I would be inclined to do it. I need to catch up though and put a little gas in the tank, and quite honestly, the drainage fee is providing revenue stream to the city. And you know, once you're able to get money, it's kind of hard to cut it off, right?
Right.
But I can tell you that I am opposed to that revenue stream because quite honestly, when I was a city attorney, I knew that we were already taxing individuals high enough for a 10-year, 20-year plan of capital improvement projects. So even though we had already increased your taxes, we came on and told you, give us a drainage fee as well. I just think that's wrong policy.
Okay, we're
Thank
going
you.
to start on this side of the room and we'll come back.
I agree with your camera theory. The crime in my neighborhood had gotten to where I had to put camera security up around my home. And since I put it up, it has decreased, it has subsided. The other situation with cameras is I think it was handled incorrectly on the red light cameras. Would you be willing to make another run at trying to get red light cameras?
Well, no, I would not. In fact, I opposed red light cameras before it was put on the ballot as well. Only because as a trial lawyer, I've had 2 deaths where people were sandwiched between cars because someone suddenly stopped at a red light because of a red light camera. So no, I would not, but I am in favor of deploying cameras strategically in neighborhoods for security purposes. No, and as a deterrent to criminals. I'd actually like to put a red and blue light on top of them so the criminals know they're being seen.
Joseph and Bob.
Statistics talking about how crime has increased where cameras that have been involved about citizens. Do you have any statistics to show crime has been affected when the citizens are armed in the neighborhood?
No, but let me just go ahead and talk to the larger issue of arming the citizens. I am a CHL here, okay? I'm for people that have concealed handguns if they have training, right? I don't want to sponsor that as a city project, but I do think you have an individual right to do so.
Just to follow up on the drainage fee, Mayor Parker had guaranteed that those funds that were being collected in the drainage fee would go into a lockbox only to be used for drainage projects. Are you saying that that is not happening, the money is being used in the general fund?
Correct. And not general fund. The reasoning is the following. We can be clever in terms of how we do things politically. We can say that because we're paying for public work salaries, these public work employees are over drainage programs, and so that's the justification. But I can tell you, when you all voted for the drainage fee, you thought that you had shovel-ready projects that money was going to go to correct the streets, not to pay for salaries and benefits. And I'm going to tell you, as the mayor of the city of Houston, I'm going to honor the pledge that was made to you in terms of how those funds are used.
Yvonne, then we're going to go around this side of the room now.
Hi, Mr. Hall. Thanks for coming today. I appreciate it. I have a question about the unsustainable properties you were speaking about. Could you share with us maybe an example of an area where there's some commercial unsustainable properties?
Absolutely.
And probably also an area where you think there's some in a residential.
Without defaming certain neighborhoods, but I can give you this, okay? If you go out into the East End, if you go out into South Houston, you have expansions of property that we have to have utilities, infrastructure, roadways provided, no tax yield. We actually have 100 acres of property that a city owned at the marriage of 288 and 610 yields no revenue for the city, but it's property that we have to always have ready assets on the ground for. Those are just some of the areas. I can go to the north side, out 59, but before you get to 1960, over on the left-hand side of the highway, there are hundreds of acres there that the city has to have ready resources to service, but no revenue from.
Over here, Tom or one of you had your.
We had a proposition passed several years ago while Bill White was mayor that said that city spending would not increase more than an increase in population and rate of inflation. At the same time, there was another resolution that passed, which could be seen as a difference, but Mayor White committed that every budget he submitted thereafter would be in keeping with Prop 2. Would you make that same commitment with regard to any budget you present, which will not exceed increasing more than population growth? and inflation.
Let me answer a different question than you asked, okay? But it's going to answer your question. I am not intent on growing the revenue base by increasing taxes on the domestic population already in the city. I am intent on growing revenue by growing businesses coming into the city. So if that answers your question, that's helpful, hopefully. I'm not going to raise taxes on the domestic population greater than those parameters that you just stated. But I believe a better way forward is if you are able to expand the revenue base from which you get your money or receive your revenue, that's the better way of raising revenue as opposed to increasing the charges on the domestic population. In other words, it's easier to have, if you have a 100-unit condo and you only have 20 people that occupy it, it's better to have 100 units occupied as opposed to just 20 so that everybody can share. It brings in more money, but you're not increasing the burden on the 20 that were originally there. That's my problem.
But you would not raise rates.
I would not raise rates. That would not be my intent to raise rates.
Betty and then Levis.
I have a question in regards to, actually, it's outside the city of Houston. The example that I'd like to provide to you is the outlet mall that's on US 290. Currently, the city of Houston somehow came up with some deal that they brokered with the mud districts. And they're getting sales tax revenue from the outlet mall. And the people who live in that area are not benefiting from that. And this is the emergency services district. And they're losing sales tax revenue. And the city of Houston, where is getting that sales tax revenue, but the citizens that live out there are not. The citizens out there are having to come up with money to build fire stations and ESD. So if you are the mayor, would you make a broker a deal to return those tax revenue back to the people that live out there?
Well, I don't even have to go outside the city limits to tell you that this problem persists inside the city.
But those are sales tax revenues that are being made outside of the city of Houston. Somehow the city of Houston has broker deals with the mud districts, which are not in the city of Houston.
I'm going to answer your question, but I'm just saying we don't even have to go outside. We have some of that occurring inside the corporate limits of the city of Houston in the TERS. We're actually taking the money away from the common taxpayers and their elected officials and putting it into private management of certain TERS management. I disagree with that policy in non-depressed areas. But on your specific issue, I really don't know all the facts. And so it would be prudent for me to reserve comment until I know more of the facts of that. But it doesn't sound from a policy standpoint that that's a sound proposition.
Lois and then Trina.
Mr. Hall, thank you so much for coming today.
Yes.
I have a two-pronged question. Number one, if you were elected mayor, would you be in favor of changing the city law, the city amendments, to where PWE will have oversight? You will take the drainage manual out of the control of PWE and put it to the city council's jurisdiction for vote and control by voting by the people. That's part A. And part B, would you be in favor of eliminating all grandfathering and loopholes that are in